I'm so happy to be here to talk to you about bikes. So why should transit people care about bikes? And I'm a bike person, but I love transit. Bikes are great. They're our happiest form of transportation. We go on vacation to bike. But why should transit people care about bikes? And one reason you should care is because bikes can help scale transit. In some cities, bikes can provide that necessary first mile, last mile connection. And all cities are different, of course, but you can have a great bus network and housing density like cities like New York. But if you need bikes, and by bikes, by the way, I mean scooters, trikes, e-cargo bikes, adaptive bikes, all forms of micromobility. But if you need that first mile, last mile, here's the problem. We're doing the bike lanes wrong. I think we all know that. And this has become a fly in the ointment in the transportation system for many cities. Terrible bike infrastructure can be a root cause of this catastrophic failure we're in cities like LA, where it's awful to walk, it's scary to bike, it's inconvenient or impossible to get to transit, and we're all stuck in traffic. But if we fix the bike lanes, and we can help scale transit, but you get something else, you get housing. So I'm gonna go through how the experts say we can fix bike lanes, and then all the amazing things that happen when you do that. So first of all, why do I know so much about bikes? I'm part of a group called the Livable Communities Initiative. It's a plan to address LA's housing crisis by building 3 to 5 stories of gentle density housing along walkable, bikeable streets near transit. It's a vision for a 15-minute city operationalized to LA. And when you try to understand housing, you really quickly get to transit and bikes because housing and transportation are interconnected. And when you solve for one, you actually solve for the other. So you have to solve them together. And our group is over 100 people where we have people who have expertise in housing, planning, codes, architecture, transit, mobility, equity, and advocacy. We have UCLA professors who study housing and transportation. And I'm a mobility person. I'm the co-host of a podcast called Bike Talk. And I interview people from all over the world. And my beat is actually Dutch cycling infrastructure. And by the way, it's abundantly clear how to make transportation systems work. And the other co-hosts on the podcast are actually all hardcore cyclists. And I'm not fit or brave, as they say. But I've experienced bikeable communities and places where everyone bikes, and it really works. And all I want in life is to live in the picture on the right. But I couldn't figure out, why don't we bike in LA? Dutch experts say we could be the best biking city in the world. We're mostly flat. We have perfect year-round weather. We build bike lanes, but then they're underutilized. And then people fight new bike lanes, with the fire of 1,000 suns. We've all heard it. But it's so weird because people love to bike. So I wanted to understand this contradiction. How do you make a bike lane work? How do you get to Amsterdam, where 80% of people bike? And the answer is design and engineering. The Dutch have cracked the code and replicated it in all of their cities, pre-war cities, medieval cities, post-war cities. And they have 40 years of data. They study transit and bikes at a university level and in think tanks. And the answer is it's the same way you would engineer a freeway. You engineer it so the banking isn't too steep, so when you go around a curve, you don't flip your car. We engineer bridges to never fail and planes to never crash. So it's totally possible to engineer safe bike lanes that people will use. And there are 2 ways. And one is you take a street like this and you turn it into this. You slow the cars down, you add protected bike lanes, you highly engineer the intersections with pavers and raised crosswalks, and cars have to do a 90-degree, very sharp turn. So they have to slow down or they'll flip. So that's one way. The other way is just no cars, and then everybody bikes. And if you've ever been to Ciclovia, when you take the cars off the street, people just bike. They just come out. Within minutes, people flood the streets. And I would never advocate not wearing a helmet, but that's how you actually know it's safe, when it's so safe that people don't wear helmets. And then people from all walks of life can bike. Seniors bike the most in the Netherlands. Families bike, small children. In the Dutch city of Utrecht, 90% of people bike. Kids bike to school. They have all this freedom. But the question that always comes up with bikes is, how safe does it have to be? And that's the entire question in bike infrastructure, how safe? And I kind of want to point out that it's a conversation that wouldn't take place with any other product. Like, how safe do you want your baby food? Safe. How safe do you want your bridges? Safe. And somehow with bike lanes, somewhere along the way, we decided that this was okay. And this is one of my favorite tweets. I'm in the bike lane, I'm on the highway, I'm riding on the combination highway bike lane that the city of Columbus considers bicycle infrastructure. And regardless of what we think should be the safety level or total lack of safety for our fellow human beings who are trying to help us out with traffic and air quality and climate by biking, it doesn't matter what we think, people opt out. They just simply won't bike. And the data shows that. The data shows that 1% of people will use the bike lane on the left and 80% of people will use the bike lane on the right. And it's just so important for stakeholders and electeds and all of us to understand that these bike lanes are not the same. And there's a study from Portland that shows the types of cyclists. 1% are fearless, up to about 8% are confident and they want a bike. And most people really want a bike, but we know they don't. And the Portland study aligns almost perfectly with the safety level of bike infrastructure in cities. And this is an observation from Brett Atencio Thomas, the active transportation coordinator for the city of Costa Mesa. And he shared this with us on the podcast. LA has 1% of people bike. It's incredibly scary. We have sharrows. Then you go to New York and Portland. Portland is the Amsterdam of America, hundreds of miles of bike lanes. They're not perfect, they're pinch points. They're moments where you can get hit by a car, but they're good, but they've never gotten over 8%. And they also got to 8% and stayed there for a decade. They've been stuck at 8%. And yet they keep adding hundreds of miles of protected bike lanes, and you'd expect it to go up incrementally as you add bike lanes. And it's just not how it works. There's a bit of a ceiling, and it's an on-off switch. And if you go, though, to Dutch level safe infrastructure, you have a quantum leap. You go from 8% to 80%. So again, it's not incremental. And it's basically the idea is that you're either risk tolerant, you bungee jump, you zip line, or you're risk averse like me. I don't bungee jump, I don't zip line. And there's no point in asking me to hang glide or bike in a sharrow. So here are the top cities in the US for biking. And as you can see, just a huge number, 1%, 2%, under 8%. And we've got 4 cities that have gotten to 8%, and then 2 that are over. And it's almost like the exception that shows it's not the norm. Both of these cities, Boulder and Davis, are college towns with a ton of bike infrastructure. And the entire issue around whether people will bike is safety, and the entire issue around safety is speed. It's the speed of the car. The next time you're in a car, if you're going 20 miles an hour, it's not that fast. But if you hit someone, they have a 10% chance of dying. At 40, 45 miles an hour, they basically have no chance of surviving. Our streets are as fast as freeways were 30 years ago. And the only safe speed for children, according to experts, is 9 miles an hour. So we really have to ask ourselves, what is the speed you want the car going when they hit someone, when they hit a child, they hit someone you know? Is it 20 miles an hour or is it 9 miles an hour? And if you really think about it, it's actually 0. We just don't want, especially children, hit by cars. So here's another visualization from the artist Alfred Twu. 1% of people will bike in traffic. They're very fearless. 8% will use good quality protected bike lanes. But the minute you make it, a car's just really slow, it's called a Wonderf in the Netherlands, a shared street where the cars are moving about 9 miles an hour, or just you really, really do the infrastructure perfectly, that's where you can get to 80%. And when you create streets like this, you can add housing because you can walk and bike to everything you need. It's a 15-minute city. And so how could this work in LA, the ultimate city of cars? And of course, you could create pockets of mobility around transit. And our group tackled this problem from both the mobility perspective and the housing perspective. And we actually both ended up at the same place. So LA has this massive housing crisis. We need to build 500,000 units of housing. And our group came together to understand, how do we solve this? And we started by asking the question, why do people fight housing? And it's really only 3 issues. It's tall buildings. People don't like tall buildings next to their homes. Often their nest egg is in their homes. And not to cast aspersions, it's just really analyzing what's going on. Ugly architecture, people don't like it. Again, not to cast aspersions at the architecture. And traffic and parking, that's the biggest one. People just are so anxious about having more traffic in their neighborhood. But we found that there is broad popular support for a 15-minute city with gentle density, 3 to 5 stories of human scale housing along our commercial corridors with beautiful architecture and car light walkable neighborhoods near transit that won't increase traffic or bring more cars into the neighborhood. So these 3 things are the difference between people fighting housing and actually advocating for housing in their neighborhoods. And it's a 15-minute city where you can walk or bike to all your daily and weekly needs in under 15 minutes, jobs, errands, transit, schools, everything you need without a car. And of course, you can occasionally have a car. You can keep a car 5 blocks away, the way you do in a lot of cities. But again, how would you operationalize this to LA? Where would you put it? And one of the best ideas out there is to leverage our historic main streets in LA. So LA was a city of 400 villages connected by trolleys, and they still have these historic main streets and villages. And they have this great fine grain retail in a small town neighborhood feel like Westwood, downtown Burbank, if you've ever been to LA, Main Street in Santa Monica. And you can just imagine, this is amazing neighborhood serving retail, right? The fine grain retail, the small shops. And now just imagine 3 to 5 stories of housing above the shops. And you can transform a street for bikes, take a street like this and transform it with trees, bike lanes, slow the cars down, and you add the housing. And it's the apartment above the shop. There's no parking and the rents are cheap. And transforming the street is easy. There is so much room on our streets. We waste so much space. First of all, for parking, you don't need 11.5 feet. You need 7 feet. You don't need 11.5 feet for a drive lane. You need 9.5 feet. And then everybody slows down and it becomes safer. So our street space is one of our greatest public assets, and it's just being wasted. And you can transform it basically overnight with paint and planters. You just scrape up the paint, you repaint, you drop down planters. We saw it during al fresco. And you can keep the parking and just add bike lanes and widen the sidewalk, or you could do a bus-only transit corridor, or you could pedestrianize the street. And you could still have cars come in for ADA and drop-offs and stuff like that. And then for transit, we can pick streets that touch our high-quality transit and create a transit-oriented development, a TOD. And this is a map of the west side of LA. You can see the beach, and here's Hollywood. And we think of these as TODs, but instead of a circle around a transit stop, the stars are our transit stops. And usually it's done as a circle. It's a spoke or a linear 15-minute city. So these stars, as I said, are along we're considered, LA Metro is considered to be world-class transit infrastructure. Obviously, we need more ridership and have to address the safety issues, but the infrastructure is really amazing. And the blue lines where we would propose you could have housing, you could do an LCI. They all have 3 characteristics. They have fine-grained retail for walkability, those small shops. So you're not trying to like walk from a Staples to an Office Depot to, a Best Buy. It's the fine-grained retail, the neighborhood serving retail. They touch high-quality transit, right? And the streets are either redundant or dead ends where you can easily slow the cars down and even pedestrianize some of them. So you can have safe biking. And Westwood Boulevard, that dead ends into UCLA, which is a huge job center. 63,000 people drive into Westwood every day. This is a dead end street. Hollywood's actually a dead end street. So, and we close Hollywood Boulevard all the time for movie openings, actually. So we know that you can close it and it doesn't create huge traffic issues. And by the way, all of the neighborhoods, these blue lines, have groups that are forming to bring an LCI to their neighborhood. And if we zone 3 to 5 stories of gentle density along the blue lines of this map, this is the equivalent of more than our entire housing deficit of 500,000 units, because it really is so dense. And I'm not saying this is the only thing we have to do. We obviously have to do everything. But it's just really not that many streets. It's about 50 miles of streets out of 7,000 miles of LA streets. And it's small to affordable apartments above the shop. Think it's a New York City walk up, but there's of course an elevator. And we can make it really easy for property owners to build above their stores. We can give them something called standard plans. These are pre-approved by right architectural designs. And a 3 to 5 story structure can go up in 6 to 8 months, especially if it's prefab. And the neighbors can actually pick the vernacular of the pre-approved plans. The builders don't care, but the neighbors really do care. And you can have a specific vernacular. And people don't have to use it. It's just free plans if they want to, making everything easier. We could go to our classic Venice architecture. Every neighborhood could have different architecture. We can use classic vernaculars from around the world, Spain, Cartagena, but none of this works with parking, with on-site parking. You could build a few units, say you could build 6 units above a store, but where would you put 12 cars? You'd have to dig up the entire street. And this is really the conundrum in housing. So mobility has this insurmountable problem that bike lanes have to be safe or people will simply opt out. And in some cities, you need them to scale the transit. Housing has an insurmountable problem, and it's actually the parking. And it works as death by 1,000 cuts. But basically with parking, you end up with buildings like this. But without parking, you can have buildings like this. And the way parking affects housing, as I said, it's multiple ways. But first of all, on-site parking is incredibly expensive to build. You need to assemble multiple lots, which drives up the cost of land by 40%. You have to go high, which gets the neighbors against you. You have to use a ton of cement and build a podium. You lose your fine grain retail, and the units aren't affordable anymore. So basically, and it has every quality that the neighbors fight. So now they're fighting you because the building's tall, you're losing your fine grain retail, and you're bringing a ton of cars in, and you've lost the architecture. So this is sort of the catastrophic failure we're in with what the parking is doing to the housing. And the minute you remove the on-site parking from the equation, you get this: affordable housing that's affordable to build, higher quality of life for people who want this type of option. And we forget how expensive owning a car is. It's $7,000 to $10,000 a year. It's the #1 source of debt and default in the country. And a street like this solves both problems. Our mobility problems: you can walk to neighborhoods serving retail, you can bike, and if it's touching transit, then you have all forms of mobility. And it solves our housing production system problem, because without parking, small builders can build 3 to 5 stories buildings above neighborhoods serving retail with small units without parking that are affordable and really livable. So I started by saying that the bike lanes, we're doing the bike lanes all wrong and what it's affecting. And it's this fly in the ointment of our transportation system, especially in cities like LA, and where it's awful to walk, scary to bike, inconvenient or impossible to get to transit, and we're all stuck in traffic. But the real fly in the ointment, the bike lanes don't work, is because of the fast cars and just having too many of them. So that's really the root cause. And this is not about, saying every street in any city should not have cars, but can a few streets be given over to people? Can you slow the cars down on a few streets? And that's where you can really focus building housing. And then it's lovely to walk. It's fun to bike. The buses can move and more people will take them. And the housing totally makes sense. And when you present a vision of trees and walking and biking to people, even people who historically fight housing, they really want this. And then there's the climate impact. California needs to build 3.5 million new homes. What if they were zero carbon homes with high ceilings and thick walls and didn't need AC because of passive design? And we baked in solar panels and heat pumps and electrification, water recycling. We baked in zero carbon, all these sustainable building materials. And it goes hand in hand with zero carbon mobility. And so 15-minute cities could really be a climate moonshot for California. And it's also an opportunity to reimagine our cities with a more romantic vision. What do we want our cities to look like? And it's the civic city, the commons. It's what the city does for the people: the community, public spaces, livability, and a few streets that are for people.